If there's one thing that we've learned, it's that you can't build a lasting marriage by pretending. Sooner or later, you know what? The mask is going to come off and it is going to all be exposed. And at that point, it can break you or it can bond you together forever. Hey, thank you so much for being here and welcome to Better Together. My name is Tony.
And I'm Kimberly.
And we are talking about being transparent or being real in marriage. Ooh. So I got to tell you, I felt duped. I feel like that
Never.
Me
duping you?
You deceived me.
Oh, and, impossible.
Yep, and right here, I'm telling everybody about it. So when you and I were dating, which was a very short amount of time. If you missed that story, go to episode 1. Anyway, so when we were dating, you were active, you were involved, you pretended to like to ride on the back of my motorcycle and to like to shoot and target practice. And
True story, ladies. This is how you hook a man.
I was deceived. Now, I know that no other woman out there has ever done that.
Never.
And if I'm intellectually honest as a man, there were some indicators that you might not like riding on the back of a motorcycle.
Okay, so what were those indicators?
Well, driving with your claws, your fingernails digging into me like you're scared to death, all of those, the fact that you'd never been on one and it messed up your hair when you rode. Those were all indicators that this might not be something I expect to do long term.
And the helmet was really stuffy. No one talks about that helmet. Talk about suffocation and overheating.
And when you go to shoot, you cover your eyes and your ears, and so you were a military brat, and you would think you had never heard a gunshot.
Never. Not that close. Not one that I'm shooting. Woo!
So now that is not the type of
city girl.
Yeah, so that is not the type of deception that we're necessarily talking about. But transparency and being real and not wearing masks is incredibly important. And it has been in those moments of realness or vulnerability that I feel like that we have really connected most deeply. And, we talked about some of the trials and some of the temptations and tests that we faced. But, I feel like I purposed a long time ago that I wanted to be honest, and I wanted to be open, and I wanted to be real, and I wanted to be consistent. One thing that I think that maybe ministers may struggle with, or pastors, or maybe a lot of people, is that they're one way at work, and then they're another way at home, or maybe they're one way with friends. And for me, I think it's incredibly important that there is consistency.
Yeah, and I would say for me, I feel like sometimes I'm a hot mess at the office, and then sometimes, guess what? I'm a hot mess at home.
So you're consistent.
I'm consistently a hot mess in some areas. How about that?
No, you're not. And one thing I do want to point out, when we talk about being transparent, I think there's a difference between emotional intelligence and transparency. I think that just being vulnerable or being transparent or being honest, because I've heard people go, well, I'm just being real. No, you're just being carnal.
Or rude.
Yeah. So, but the difference is your doorbell rings and you and I are having a moment and we open the door and suddenly we're nice. Well, that's emotional intelligence, because you don't want to project your issue onto somebody else. That's just common sense and inappropriate. That's not being fake. That's being appropriate. Now, to live that way consistently, to put on airs outside of the context of your relationship, incredibly dangerous and detrimental. The idea of I'm going to mess up or somebody is going to find me out. Man, I just don't think I could live that way.
I think that would be a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
I have enough pressure living with me currently. I don't need to add more pressure, like living inconsistently.
Yeah, and trying to put on a show for somebody else.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, so I think it's important. I was talking to, a group recently, and I asked them a question, probably an inappropriate question, but it was in one of our starting point classes, which is, class people go through if they decide if, want to be a member of the church or whatever. And I remember saying, well, let me ask you something. if you knew that I was going to leave right now talking to you, and I was going to go home and I was going to pull a drunk or beat my wife or, abuse my kids, I said, would you come to this church? And they're like, no, absolutely not. I said, well, great. I said, you don't expect that from me. It would be unacceptable from me. Is that true of you? It should be, right?
Right.
I mean, it should be true of every one of us, especially if we're believers.
Well, and that's the thing. I don't know why we hold one profession or one, like you said, you're a pastor, but we hold one profession above another, perhaps. But I don't think what you do for a living has anything to do with how you're living.
Yeah.
I feel like if you are a good employee at work, then you should be a good person at home. Do you know what I mean? There just shouldn't be this duplicitousness in your life to begin with anyway.
Yeah. So how important would you say that being real and being transparent, and I'm not talking about, in the context of just trying to put on a show or saying that being real is just an invitation to be carnal, because a lot of people associate that to be worldly. Well, I don't do that, but how important is transparency? How important has it been to us? Is there a time when it really mattered?
Well, I think for me, it was actually a really important aspect because, I came out of a bad relationship. If we've said that in previous shows, how we kind of came together. But I was duped. I mean, the guy duped me on so many levels. When I knew him, he wasn't someone that smoked or that I think we drank, but it wasn't, a lifestyle. But he became he started, I think, chewing tobacco and smoking and then hiding those things from me.
Yeah.
And so I was like, he's becoming this different person. And so
I would imagine that created a lot of volatility in your relationship.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh,
yeah.
It totally did. And then because I wasn't a Christ follower, he, became an idol, and there was self-soothing behavior, I guess, on my part because I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't have that firm foundation.
Right.
But it was important that you be who I could trust, because that's a form of trust. And so I needed to know that you weren't going to change on me.
Yeah, I remember
when we got married.
Yeah, well, you're a very truth-oriented person to begin with, and then to see if I did anything that appeared to be, deceptive. And I want to, warn folks. I see this often. People will experience volatility in their relationship, and they'll start partaking in self-soothing behavior. Maybe it's, a guy when he goes to work, he starts dipping or he does something like that, and then he hides it, from his wife. Now, all of this stems from not being transparent and dealing with the issue in the first place. So, I mean, that's kind of what it gets into. But I think we really need to think those things through and keep the issue.
Okay.
And if you're a safe place, I mean, if I'm afraid that I come to you because of, I'm miserable because of something you're doing and you're going to blow up, you being godly is an invitation for me to be transparent.
Okay.
And that's huge. And I hope I can say the same, that hey, I just backed into Tony's car. I'm not worried. I'm not worried that he's going to lose his mind. By the way, 3 times, if I'm not mistaken.
But I haven't gotten a ticket recently.
I'm going to give her a ticket. Anyway, but that's huge because you know who they are and you know the consistency of behavior. I was talking about, I remember when when we first got married, and we're talking about the kids were really young. And when I cut the grass or I hung out in the garage, I didn't smoke, but I had a pipe. And so I guess I did smoke. Anyway, I had a pipe, and I just loved the way the tobacco.
He changed that self-soothing behavior when he met and married me.
But it wasn't a lifestyle. It wasn't something I do. But I was in the garage, and I had the pipe, and I still had it. So I guess I still had a tendency to use it. But very early on, I was lighting it, and one of the kids walked into the garage. And when the kid walked in, they had this look on their face of just absolute perplexed. We're like, what is that? And I'm like, oh, it's nothing. The kid runs in and goes, Mom, Dad's firing, because they had never seen me smoke. They're like, Dad's firing. And Kim's like, what? So she comes into the garage and goes, the kids said you're firing. I was like, well, they had never heard the term smoking.
Wow.
Talk about naive kids. We homeschooled. Oh, we're terrible. Anyway, so and at that point I realized, at that point I realized, well, that's not something I do. I don't want to live inconsistently with how, with how I am. It's not who I am. So at that point, I
wouldn't have married you if you had been a smoker. Well, just saying.
Well, it was also something that I didn't want to model to my kids. In other words, I didn't want them to think for one moment that it was okay to slip around and partake in a behavior.
Okay.
We really wanted to be transparent, and our kids, as adults, they are transparent. They don't wear masks. If they have something to say,
they'll say it.
If they're feeling a certain way, you kind of know. They're not into pretending a whole lot. We do and have pointed each other consistently to Jesus, and it's because we want to be better. This is something that I think has always been important. So very early on, I made up in my mind, and I feel like you did too, that I was never going to cohabitate with you. In other words, I was not just going to live in the same house as business partners.
Oh, and that's been, I think, challenging at times because we worked together, we flipped houses together, right?
Yeah.
Everything.
Even this,
we do everything together. So it can get into business partner mode sometimes.
And I've heard people get so frustrated with repetitive behavior or whatever to the point they're all, I'm done. And at that point, they just begin cohabitating. Well, that is because, and suddenly what happens is that transparency and that honesty and that openness, they begin to get
shut down.
Yeah, immediately. That's when I see that pattern of self-soothing behavior and stuff like that begins to rear its ugly head.
Interesting. I didn't realize that.
Yeah. So once you say, I'm done, or that fight was just the last fight, or I'm not going to deal with this anymore, that is when you hit that slippery slope. And I think committing to never, even if I felt like going there at times, I have been frustrated. If I'm honest, I have been very frustrated with you at times, and I'm sure you've been very frustrated with me at times. But we would point each other and do habitually and consistently point each other to Jesus. We
hold each other accountable.
Yeah,
I would say.
Yeah, the importance of recognizing and realizing that the Word of God calls us constantly to live consistently with who we really are, not to behave in a way inconsistent with who we really are. And a lot of people will go, well, I'm just pretending. No, your flesh can feel one way. Not to follow your flesh isn't pretending, it's surrendering to the Spirit and doing the right thing.
Right.
And that's huge. It's a big difference.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't know of, I'm sure I do have some self-soothing behaviors that you could probably tell me I have.
Cookie dough.
Yeah. Ooh, that is my kryptonite. I do. I like sugar.
I'm a coffee man.
Yeah.
Jesus forgive me.
So there we go. Those are our indulgences.
Yeah.
But I don't feel like I've been inconsistent. I feel like I have been transparent.
Yeah.
And I think even when I struggle in my transparency, I think I come to you with it.
Yeah.
Like, hey, I'm struggling in this, what do you think about it? And sometimes if I'm being transparent now, I haven't liked what you've said.
Yeah.
It's made me kind of irritated.
Right. Well, godliness and dealing.
Yeah, because it's been his counsel has been godly, and so my flesh has been irritated.
Well, like I said before, your godliness and my godliness is an invitation for your transparency. You feel safe. You don't feel like if I go to him, again, if I hit his car or we have a disagreement, he's going to beat me or he's going to leave me.
Right.
And that's important. So Christ in our life has given that, as we talked about before, an anchor. And that anchor of consistency goes together with transparency and reality, and it works. So I want to encourage you, if you're watching, to take the mask off. Be open, be honest, be transparent. And if there are things in your life that need to be changed and need to be addressed, listen, it's okay. It's okay. There's a phraseology that I use very often: get the junk out of your trunk. In other words, don't drive around with this hidden baggage because of shame or because of failed expectations or because you're trying to catch a date and hook a man.
Yeah.
Anyway, hey, look, thank you for joining us. Thank you for spending time with us as we have kind of talked about some of these things and being transparent. We'll invite you to
Like, subscribe, share.
Yeah, and never forget.
Consider.
Never forget that we are truly better together, and we look forward to seeing you again sooner than later.
Yes.